I am speaking. Oh, wait.
I hear you.
Right? Now you hear me, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there seems to be a delay.
That's probably the glory of WebEx. Well,
Public
anyway,
safety is on Zoom. We only have one application, so we have to alternate because there's two committees on one day. Otherwise, you guys will have Zoom.
if New York City weren't so cheap, we could have two Zoom accounts instead of
So,
this
Jim, why
crappy
don't you
thing.
introduce yourself?
I'm Jim Berlin. I've been a member of this committee since the beginning of time. I've been a member of this community board even longer than that. By the way, you're all aware that the RKO Coliseum is now gone. It is now level. So, yeah. I remember seeing trolley cars on Broadway and on 181st Street when I was a little kid.
Thanks, Jim. Vivian?
My name is Vivian Ducat. I'm the public member. I think I've been on this committee for 14 years, something like that. I was on it originally as a full member of the board, but now I'm just on this committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivian.
Welcome. I don't remember trolley cars.
Yeah. And Juan Guzman?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Juan Guzman, and I'm new to this committee this year.
Thank you, Juan. Omar?
Everyone, Omar Tejada here.
And Rosie?
Hi everyone, this is Rosie. I've been here since I would say maybe February, and I'm happy to be here.
So you got here just in time for COVID, is that it?
That's exactly it.
Okay. And I think I saw two board members who are not committee members, although one of them is gone. I thought I saw Domingo, but I don't see him anymore. And Michelle. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
She's muted.
I know, but she can unmute herself. Okay, so, with that, we have two agenda items, and then we have at least one item of old business. I don't know if we have any items of new business. Actually, at the November committee meeting, we were supposed to have an updated conversation with Diego Roballo from the Historic District Council to talk about promoting historic preservation from a cultural perspective in underrepresented communities, which is a rather interesting topic given some of the things we've been talking about. And then the Department of City Planning is presenting to us a proposal for zoning for coastal flood resiliency. And this is probably an update, if I'm not mistaken, on presentation that was made to the committee a few years ago. So with that, Diego, welcome. Good to have you with us this time.
Thanks so much, Wayne. Thank you so much, Wayne, and hi everyone. My name is Diego. I work for the Historic Districts Council. We are an organization that works to preserve the architectural and cultural heritage of New York City. And I work with mainly with Spanish-speaking communities. And I wanted to talk today about my work in the Bronx and use it as a case study to explore possibilities on how underrepresented communities in Upper Manhattan can be more engaged in historic preservation. I was trying to figure out how to share my screen, but apparently I'm not able to.
I think Paola has to give you permission to share your screen.
Okay, I'm waiting for that permission.
Okay. Hi, Paola, are you able to give Diego the ability to share his screen?
Well, it's okay. I think I'm just gonna talk then.
Okay.
Give me a
So-
second. I'm trying to figure it out. Unlike you guys, I'm not too familiar with WebEx. Chanel knows a little bit more than me, so give me a second. I'll try to figure it out.
Yeah, we're not familiar either.
So what I wanted to talk about my work in the Bronx is specifically the Bronx Borough Landmarks Committee, which is a committee that we started at the beginning of this year. This committee is a coalition of Bronx residents from all neighborhoods to share ideas and concerns about preservation of historic buildings in the Bronx. And this group has focused mainly on the cultural heritage of the Bronx. And this is because if we compare Manhattan to the Bronx, we can see that there are more cultural landmarks in the Bronx. So what we've been focusing on in the Bronx Borough Landmarks Committee is on identifying these places that have cultural relevance and find ways to highlight them and learn more about them. So far, we've had around 7 meetings in the Bronx, all of them via Zoom, and we've had speakers from all neighborhoods, for most neighborhoods in the Bronx, and they are residents who are passionate about preservation, who have been living in their neighborhoods for decades, and they want to share their passion about the historic buildings of their neighborhoods. We've had some interesting characters in the Bronx, like Mike Amadeo, Elena Martinez, Bobby Sanabria, who are people who have contributed to the cultural evolution of the Bronx. And they've given us some presentations about historic buildings, historic places that they feel passionate about. And usually in these meetings, we have around 20 to 30 people, and they serve an educational purpose. People attend these meetings to learn about the historic treasures of all their neighborhoods in the Bronx. And we've had very, very positive outcomes. Our ultimate goal with this group is to engage Hispanic communities or communities that were not very familiar with historic preservation in activities that are going to, help us attain landmark status for specific buildings. So, for example, a few months ago, we had a couple of people from this group testify in favor of the designation of Manaida Street in the Bronx, which was one of the latest historic districts to be designated in New York City. So that's our ultimate goal through this Bronx group. We want people to be more engaged and talk about the historic treasures of the Bronx. So I was talking to my boss, Simeon Bankov, and we thought we could start doing something similar for Upper Manhattan, including community districts 10, 11, and 12. And what we are thinking about is creating a platform for people to learn more about specific historic buildings.
Yellow cookies. No, this. How funny yellow cookies. I should just put a cookie.
Someone needs to mute themselves.
So that's what we were thinking about Upper Manhattan. We want to create a similar group to the Bronx Borough Landmarks Preservation Committee for Upper Manhattan, and specifically community boards 10, 11, and 12, because those community boards have a lot of underrepresented communities, Hispanic communities who traditionally have not been very engaged or interested in historic preservation. And that's what we want to attain in Upper Manhattan. So what we were thinking is for December 16 to have our first meeting. And in this meeting, we want to invite someone who is knowledgeable and passionate about history in Upper Manhattan, and invite residents of this community board and the other two community boards that I mentioned. And so the reason why I wanted to talk in this meeting is because I wanted to, first of all, to communicate this and to invite you and to ask for any possible communication channels where I could use to reach out to residents in your community board, invite them to this event, which is going to take place on December 16.
Well, I mean, I would say, first of all, Community Board 12 and the Land Use Committee, for the time that I've been on it, have been very interested in and supportive of landmarking and, historic preservation. And, we have argued, and, less than an hour ago, we're arguing that, there are certain communities that just don't seem to get the attention and recognition when it comes to, landmarking and preservation, and we're one of them. And I would say that it's not, just a matter of engaging, the, Hispanic community. There are, when I worked with Harlem CDC, there were, African Americans who didn't see the value in, historic Harlem. So there are lots of, community members who don't quite know the history and the value of the buildings and the place they see every day. And when they learn about it, they suddenly become advocates for those places. And that's terribly important.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point, because that's what we've seen in the Bronx. Like, these committee members were previously not interested in landmarking or history, but we've engaged them. We've told them of the historic treasures of their neighborhoods, and so far their interests have increased a lot. And so yeah, I'm sure that in your community board there are many communities who are not very familiar, interested in the historic treasures of Community Board 12. So our ultimate outcome for this would be to make those communities more interested in their historic, in the historic heritage of their neighborhood. So I think it's going to be very important for us to be successful in this project, to be able to reach out to the people who are going to connect us with those communities that are underrepresented, those communities that are not familiar with landmarking. And that's one of the things that I wanted to ask during this meeting is how can I reach out to those underrepresented communities? How can I get to them and invite them to these type of events that we are planning on having?
Well, I mean, if you have informational flyers on the event that you can share with us, I'm sure the community board office can, e-blast it to the folks on their mailing list, or, add it to social media, just as, this is a meeting that's coming up. It's unfortunately happening before our general meeting. Otherwise, you could also promote it at the general meeting, but you're bringing it to the attention of the Land Use Committee, and the extent to which, you can share that information with us. We can give it to Paola and Ebenezer, and they can, help get the word out. Also sharing it with some of the community-based organizations that are, on our mailing list, so they can then, reach out to their constituents and share the information as well. So, I mean, do you have informational flyers?
Yes, I'm gonna send it to you, and I appreciate that. I think that's gonna be very helpful. So yeah, I think that's a great start. I'm gonna send some informational material inviting people to this event that we're gonna have on December 16. And if you can disseminate that material, I think that would be extremely helpful, and I think it will be a great start.
And will that event, will it have like simultaneous translation? What are the logistics going to be?
Yeah, we could explore that. We could have a simultaneous translation. If there is going to be many Spanish-speaking attendees, we can definitely simultaneous translation. Yeah.
Well, you have a a diverse community, and some folks, including members of this committee, are bilingual and are comfortable in attending the meeting in English and Spanish. There are others who may be more comfortable having the information in Spanish. And I attended a Community Board 9 event where they set it up really nicely so that you had two links, and one link was basically a breakout room where you were getting the information in real time in Spanish. So you didn't have someone speaking and then stopping and then translating. It was an even flow. And so with the technology set up right, you can get all that information to the audience in a rather seamless way.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful suggestion. And if we're going to have many Spanish-speaking people, I think that's something that we can definitely do.
Vivian?
Is the purpose only to look at Latino potential sites, or is it also covering the ethnicities covered in these three, which are diverse beyond Latinos?
Yeah, we want to cover everything. So the reason why I'm saying Latinos is because traditionally the Latinos are the ones who are not very much engaged in landmarking and historic preservation. So for the Landmarks Committee, we initially focused on inviting Latinos, but the theme of every presentation was about any type of history, not just Latino history. Because what we want to achieve here is to make these Latino communities interested in the history of their neighborhood, and that history may or may not be related to Latino culture. So, yeah.
Other questions, comments from committee members? And I can only see two committee members, so any committee members who have questions or comments, I guess you have to speak up or show your face. Let me start with the committee members. Hearing none, I saw a hand from Peter Green. Peter, you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is fantastic, Diego. Vivian and we were just talking with Wayne, and Leslie also was on this call, and we were just talking with Wayne half an hour ago or so about another landmark to an ethnic minority in New York, which is a house that was built by an abolitionist who created an abolitionist colony here in the 1850s in Washington Heights. And the summary rejection that we got from the Landmarks Commission because the building's architectural integrity wasn't fully preserved. And Wayne is really a huge proponent and a very eloquent one of Landmarks' need to accept its legal and historical charge to preserve the cultural and historical landmarks of New York, even if they're not in perfect architectural condition. I mean, they did actually landmark the housing project in the Bronx where hip hop started, and it would be really hard to call that piece of, brilliant architecture. So I think you're onto something here, and if we can help, I mean, we're trying to get this house landmarked and get them to reconsider what they're doing here, but let's definitely talk offline and how we can join forces, because Simeon's been very helpful to us, and we would love to support you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna send some communication materials, and if you can disseminate that, that would be wonderful.
I'm going to send you in the chat my email. And now I'm going to mute myself.
We actually have Assemblyman Al Taylor on the line, but I don't know if he wants to speak. Al, are you able to unmute him?
They will have to unmute
Or
themselves.
Al?
It's all on their side. It's not on our side. They will have to unmute themselves.
Hi, good evening.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Wayne, Peter, all of you all. I really just joined to get some insight. The letter that I saw, the double whammy, I'll call it the double whammy with the landmark. I did send that over to the mayor's office, and I hope to have some conversation about that tomorrow.
Great.
That's the landmark decision, and I know I'm on with a letter that Gail put together, our borough president. So I hope to give you guys some updates maybe by Friday, just in terms of what feedback I'm getting from the mayor's office, because I think they did that too quickly, too fast, and they need to come back and revisit that decision.
Great.
Right.
It's really wonderful.
And Assemblyman Taylor, in terms of the effort that Diego and the Historic District Council is doing to outreach to the Upper Manhattan community on landmarking, if they send information to your office, can you also help get the word out?
Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. Whatever I can do, I want to help move that and change the narrative. Absolutely. Please feel free to call upon us. We'll walk the streets, beat the drums, whatever we need to do to keep that community intact the way it is right now.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. So is there an email that I should email you to?
Yes.
Or...
Wendy's on and she'll drop it in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Vivian.
Hi, how are you?
And Al, I just wanted to say thank you so much. We really appreciate all the help you can give us on the House 857 and the abolitionists. It's a really important story, and hopefully we'll be able to tell it for hundreds of years to come with your help. Thanks.
Well, I'm hoping that we're going to be victorious, and if it were not for the scratching and sniffing, we had this jewel in our community all these years and no one knew about it. So
exactly.
Definitely it's a fight, and I love to be the underdog. So I look forward to it. And thank you all.
Underdog victorious? To you.
Sorry?
A great song, Underdog Victorious. I'll send it to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what makes America so great. I mean, look, we have a jewel in our neighborhood and nobody knew it. We walked past it, around it, and we probably said a lot of unfavorable things when other people live there, but it's right there in our backyard. So I'm excited about the process. Looking forward to it. Thank you again, and let me step back.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any further questions or comments on this agenda item, the promoting historic preservation from a cultural perspective in underrepresented communities? Hearing none, and just to be clear, in this particular platform, the individuals have to unmute themselves. It's not the office doing it. So, with that, I would say, Diego, it was great speaking to you. Please be sure to send the information, my way. I will make sure that gets shared with the office, but also, I will pass it along to the Borough President's office and to Mark Levine's office, basically the elected officials who represent Upper Manhattan, Udonis Rodriguez, asked them to all, help to get the word out so that, we have a good amount of attendees on the 16th.
Question for you, Wayne. I'm sorry. Is there at some point that we want to do a presser regarding this? Will that help jumpstart?
Are you talking about the 857 building?
Yes.
We were talking about that, an hour ago or so, and I would say absolutely. What was interesting is on, I think it was Channel 4 News last night, and I don't remember the person's name, but it was in Brooklyn, and there was a building that their community is advocating for preservation. It looked like it's in danger of being demolished, and their argument is it's in a community of color. The building's historical and cultural significance is tied to that community, and they can't get any attention or traction from LPC on getting the building recognized. And we were saying, just an hour ago, so there seems to be a pattern where if it's, architecturally important, LPC has no trouble, accepting that as the reason for designation. But if the primary reason is historical and cultural, and it's historical and cultural tied to communities of color, it's going to get lots of questions of what is really that important. And it seems to be a clear double standard.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but anyone who is not speaking must turn their microphones off, mute them, because there's all this background noise and it's getting impossible.
That's absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so once again, thanks, Diego. The next item on the agenda, and as Jim Berlin said, if you're not speaking, please mute your phone, your computer, whatever it is, because we're picking up the background noise.
Rosie and Pat, please turn your microphones off. Mute yourselves.
Mine was on mute.
So the next item on the agenda is a presentation by the Department of City Planning. I believe it's going to be led by Annie White, although I see Ryan Cote is also with us, but Department of City Planning on zoning for coastal flood resiliency plan. And I believe you also need to share your screen, but from what I can see, at least on my side, at the bottom of the screen, there should be an area that says share. And if you click on that, it's a share content, so you should be able to control it if you have that. But in any event, Annie, Ryan, the floor is yours.
Planners, they don't have permission to share, so that pushing that button does nothing.
Well, if they need permission, then once again, we pointed out to Paola earlier that they would need to do that. So we just need
He has no, and everyone that's on this call has access to share screen without me having to do anything. It's part of the
that's what I thought.
components.
That's what I thought. Annie?
Great. So let me know, is everyone seeing a slide from me saying towards resilient land use?
Yes.
Okay, great. Then we're in business. Thank you all. Yes, I will be presenting this citywide text amendment today. Thank you for having us. Ryan Cody is technically on a little delayed holiday, but he is kindly tuning in just to stay privy to our conversations. So this is a proposal led by the city for a zoning text amendment to Article 6, Chapter 4, related to flood resiliency. I will just say that this, if you've seen the materials, it's quite a dense text amendment, and this is also quite a detailed presentation I'll be giving. I am trying to be both comprehensive and concise, but I do anticipate that there'll be some questions that come out of this. As it is a citywide text amendment, Ryan and I are not the primary project managers on this. So there are my colleagues at the department who are much more familiar with the text and will be better at answering questions. So I'm happy to take any remaining questions that I can today and report back to you. So I'm sure I don't need to explain to this group the widespread and devastating impacts of Hurricane Sandy, but I think it's important to kind of frame the conversation today around this as to underscore the importance of the work that we're doing around coastal resiliency throughout the city. Sandy resulted in the death of 43 New Yorkers, 90,000 buildings were inundated with water, and 2 million people were left without water. With increasing risks of floods, it is even more imperative that the city take action in a multi-pronged approach to ensuring resiliency and disaster preparedness. So when we talk about flood risk and climate resiliency, that can mean a lot of different things. Oftentimes, well, today we're really focusing on coastal storms, as that presents the most significant flood risk in terms of compromising human safety and property damage. And when we talk about, the floodplain, often what we're talking about is what FEMA has designated the flood zone. So if you take a look at the map on the left, I'll often be referring to the 1% floodplain. And what that means is that there is every year a 1% chance that we're going to be seeing floods in this area. That is considered kind of high risk floodplain. There's also a moderate risk floodplain, which is the 0.2%. And that is going to take into importance throughout this presentation. Now, while we say that that 0.2% might not seem like a high risk, we know that with the Hurricane Sandy, that storm surge did reach into that 2% area, which is what that map is showing in the yellow in the middle. And then there's an additional need to think about the longevity and the changing nature of these floodplains. So the map on the right is showing what that 1% floodplain will look like or is projected to look like in 2050. And I wanted to highlight that a little bit further because it's important that when we're doing our zoning and doing our planning, we're not just planning for what the floodplain is today, but what it's projected in the future. So you can see that it is projected by 2050 that almost 800,000 people will live in that 1% floodplain. And just for scale, that is 100,000 people more than the entire population of the city of Boston. So it's a significant portion of our city residents and buildings that are in danger by this 2050 floodplain. And also just to zoom in on Community Board 12 specifically, this isn't looking at that 2050, this is going back to that 1% and 2% number, just to give you an idea of the designated areas that we'll be speaking about. As you can see, it's largely kind of along in that northeastern corridor along the Harlem River, the 1% being the light shaded yellow. But you can see that that 2% area does extend into kind of the heart of the Inwood core, many areas that were also part of the Inwood rezoning area.
Can I ask a quick question before you proceed?
Sure.
Is anyone else seeing a sort of a gray hatched box in a section of the presentation? Yes?
Yeah. I can confirm. I'm experiencing the same.
Okay, I think that is.
Okay,
Did it go?
Be minimized a bit, but it's still there.
Okay, well, I think it's what is coming up with the self view in, okay.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
But there's no information in it. It's just blocking part of the slide.
No.
That's gone, but now it's blocking the title of the slide.
Wish I could. I'm also not quite as familiar with
I still see something blocking out most of Inwood.
Well, yeah, it's getting worse.
Yeah, I'm looking at options on my, right now I'm looking at some options on WebEx to see if I can minimize this like header that is up at the top. Let me see. Not sure. Okay, how is that?
Better.
Okay.
But there's still a shaded area over much of Inwood.
At the very
And that's
top.
why we need another Zoom account instead of fighting with this crap.
Yeah, well, we can't deal with that right now,
It
unfortunately.
needs commenting, and I just commented.
Okay. What if, is it better or worse if is it too small if I do it in this view so that you can see the entire slide?
That works for me.
Okay.
Yeah, this is better.
Okay. All right, thanks all. Hopefully we can make this work. Okay. So there's just many different entities that regulate the floodplain. So FEMA, which is of course a federal organization, creates nationwide standards for what's in these floodplains with the flood insurance rate maps. And those are then translated into the New York City Building Code, which is implemented by DOB. And they take FEMA standards and implement it into the building code. And then the zoning resolution, which DCP addresses, is to accommodate those regulations, but through zoning, we're also thinking about neighborhood character, urban design, and the long-term planning of our neighborhoods. So it's important also to note that zoning specifically and building code deals with the built form, but there's many different aspects, and it's only one piece of a larger puzzle of coastal resiliency. So there's other coastal resiliency strategies that need to happen, a focus on infrastructure such as transit and energy, and also kind of the more interpersonal direct support of residents and businesses. But today we're specifically going to be looking at flood-proofing buildings. Also, caveat that the floodplain is very large, 520 miles of coastal area and diverse. And throughout this presentation, you might see areas that don't necessarily correspond with what you know about Inwood. We've tried to focus this presentation on Manhattan and Inwood, but this is a text proposal that's going out to 59 community boards. And because of that, we kind of think about resiliency across our coastline and this spectrum of, where is it appropriate to really limit density and limit growth, and then areas that are more protected, that it's appropriate to encourage density and growth in those areas. So the text amendment that's in front of you today is kind of the culmination of a long process that started during Hurricane Sandy with the executive emergency order. There were subsequent text amendments in 2013 and 2015 that were done quite quickly, but we knew that we needed to get something on the books immediately, and those purposely were given sunset clauses or expiration dates, knowing that we wanted to engage in a larger study, engaging communities down the road. And that's the process that we've been engaging in since then. We've briefed more than 3,000 stakeholders across all the boroughs in various different forms. Hopefully people in this meeting were able to attend those. And the goal was both to educate the community on flood risk, but also learn from people about what's working with the current zoning text and what should be changed. And we had many different takeaways and lessons learned from those meetings. I won't read through all of them, but as an example, overall we realized that a lot of our flood text was very focused on low density areas such as single detached homes, and not enough thought was given into our high density and medium density areas. So they assisted with buildings that were able to physically elevate, truly lifting out of the flood zone, but that's not possible for many of our attached homes and multifamily homes. Also, businesses and the success of businesses wasn't addressed enough, knowing that certain uses need to have, street front sidewalk access. So there's also a component of commercial focus to the proposal now. And a few additional things. A lot of our proposal is regarding allowing owners to relocate uses that were below the floodplain above. So there was kind of some inconsistencies and loopholes that came from the ability to increase height to do that relocation. And also some of the streetscapes had unintended consequences. So we both want to ensure that we're designing resilient buildings, but also designing buildings that, you know, have good urban design characteristics and don't just form a blank wall against the sidewalk. So before I get into the proposal itself, I also want to make sure we understand what the current building code requires. And as a reminder, the building code is what would be required for any new construction or existing buildings that are doing a large renovation or construction project. We are not forcing existing buildings that aren't doing any other kind of construction. They wouldn't have to comply with the building code. And as a reminder, I'm going to do a little bit of reading as this is a little bit dense, but the building's location and requirements are based on their location within the flood zone and also what we define as the design flood elevation or DFE. You'll see that throughout the presentation as this blue dot noted DFE. And that DFE is the height that the floodwaters would be expected to rise, plus an additional elevation for some protection. So what this means is for residential buildings, all living spaces, so all dwelling units must be completely located above DFE. Any area below it must be wet flood-proofed, which means that floodwaters can move in and out safely, and that area can be used for things like parking, storage, and access in and out of the building, but no residential units are allowed to be wet flood-proofed. And that image you can see on the left. For mixed use or commercial buildings, you can, wet flood-proof and move all uses above, but you also have the opportunity to do dry flood-proofing, which would mean that in a flood, that area would remain completely dry. This is very expensive, but can be beneficial for property owners that want to keep that first floor. So this is, currently what's in the books that zoning will continue to address. But we realized that with our last flood text in 2013, 2015, that there were some conflicts with what the building code requires. And those related to the location of uses, the size and shape of buildings, the bulk regulations that zoning requires, and also that public realm interaction and how buildings interface with the street. So now I'll be getting into the nitty-gritty details of the citywide zoning proposal, zoning for coastal flood resiliency. So throughout this process of studying the floodplain further and engaging with so many stakeholders in our community outreach, we came away with 4 overarching goals. Those are outlined here, and just to save a little bit of time, I'm going to get into those more specifically one by one, and not go through them here. So the first is to encourage resiliency throughout both the current and the future floodplains. What we heard is that addressing what's the 1% floodplain now is not enough. If property owners are going to be doing significant financial investments in their building, we want to be planning for the future. So due to this, we would expand the applicability of our flood text to a broader set of buildings that extend beyond the current 1%. So as you can see here, this is including the 1% and the 0.2% of those annual floodplain areas. So to zoom in again, this is the same image that I showed earlier in the presentation of CB12. So the image on the right, the map on the right, shows that 0.2% that this flood text will now be applicable towards. So goal 2 is there's 5 parts of supporting resilient design of all building types, and I'll go through these strategies one by one. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, so I'm going to do a little bit of reading. The first is regards to the building envelope. So the goal is to create a more streamlined rule for how height is measured in the floodplain to allow property owners to safely physically elevate habitable and occupiable space to areas above the floodplain. So in the existing text, it allows the building height, which is regulated by zoning, to be a variety of heights above grade, ranging from 10 feet to 12 feet. And this is very variable across the city depending on what zoning district they are in and where they're located. And it's very complex both for owners to figure out and for the city to regulate. So this proposal really is supposed to streamline that and making it more consistent and equitable throughout the city. So what the proposal is saying is that heights can now be measured from a new reference plane that is either 10 feet above grade at the 1% floodplain or 5 feet above grade at the 0.2% floodplain. So, say you have a zoning district that allows 60 feet building height, that's now in the floodplain that's being measured from either 10 feet or 5 feet. One important aspect of this, in addition, is that the proposal is removing an existing loophole in our previous height allowances. So today, property owners can get that additional 10 to 12 feet, but they don't actually have to ensure that the structure is being future-proofed from flooding. So they can get the additional height, but they're actually not doing anything on that ground floor. So this proposal is actually requiring that height relief, that additional height, is tied to flood proofing of the building. So there now would be required to put the first floor at that reference plane and flood proof below. Next couple slides are going to go through some additional ground floor requirements. And this is related to areas that need to be wet proofed. The proposal would allow floor area exemptions for spaces that are wet proof to apply to both existing and new buildings. So floor area exemptions currently exist, which means that if you provide wet proofing, which means you're allowing water to come in and out in a flood, you get a floor area exemption, which is zoning floor area that's given back to you that you can then use elsewhere. This is an incentive to have property owners relocate important floor area above the floodplain and allow that space to be, parking or storage or other things, that it's okay if they experience a flood. So this is extending that allowance to both new and existing buildings to further encourage property owners to relocate important space above. Similarly, with dry flood-proof spaces, we also want to encourage that property owners invest in dry floodproofing or relocating the areas on the ground floor. Some of our previous dry floodproofing floor area exemptions had some unintended consequences, which property owners previously were creating what we intended to be true cellar spaces, but they were squeezing in commercial floor area and what we were defining as cellars, but were really just shortened floors or sinking in the first floor so that it was below the flood elevation so that they could get a floor area exemption. So this proposal would modify these regulations to reduce the amount of floor area that can be exempted to only the 30 feet within space of the sidewalk. So this is to ensure that we're pushing occupiable, retail or commercial floor area up to the sidewalk, while also reducing the kind of incentives of creating a whole cellar level and having, poor quality and not marketable space below grade just to allow the developers to get that floor area exemption. In addition to this, there's additional streetscape urban design requirements that improve the design and have different, requirements to ensure that we're not just getting a blank wall at the street front, ADA access, as you see here. The third goal was to address what we heard from many owners and residents about the need to adapt over time and incremental retrofits. So typically when you have to bring a building up to code, once you trigger a large construction project, you immediately have to completely comply. Well, this was actually disincentivizing owners from doing any retrofit work because just of the large financial requirement of bringing something fully into compliance. So these efforts are to allow them to make incremental moves to encourage resiliency while also not, making it financially infeasible. So we learned that raising mechanical equipment is often, extremely important and the most cost-effective first step at making a building more resilient, especially on these large campus type buildings as you see here. So this proposal would continue to allow the relocation of mechanical equipment on either on top of the roofs or on a separate structure, and consider any mechanical equipment a permitted obstruction. Additionally, we heard from many small businesses and industrial businesses that they would like to be more resilient, but they are just not able to completely elevate or dry flood proof all of their operations, either due to cost or just the operational requirements of, say, a manufacturing space. So this proposal would allow them to select priority areas and relocate them to higher ground without completely relocating the entire first floor. The next proposal would enable different types of flood protections to be implemented. So this includes allowances for different types of a variety of panels or landscape berms that would be considered permitted obstructions. And it would also allow for spaces within buildings that are used for storage for these panels to be exempted from floor area to encourage property owners to store deployable panels on site. So lastly, we are looking at our waterfront areas, and currently through our various waterfront requirements, many yards and visual corridors are limited in how they can be raised to account for flood risk. They're required to provide public access using specific design standards and often have little flexibility. And so this proposal is offering more flexibility on the grading or topography of some of those waterfront sites to ensure that we're allowing for resiliency measures such as soft surfaces and soft shorelines. And finally, the fourth goal is a little bit different in that it's relating to the citywide text, not just specifically within the floodplain. So all of these would apply citywide beyond that 1% and 0.2% floodplain. So Sandy certainly showed us that the effects go beyond the floodplain of storm surge, especially regarding the energy grid. So the proposal is allowing power systems, including things like generators, solar energy, and other energy storage systems to be considered permitted obstructions on a zoning lot within open areas on the zoning lot. In addition, this is kind of broader than just flood resiliency, but the proposal would ensure that the city can provide ADA access across zoning lots. So it would classify ramps and lifts as permitted obstructions in open areas to provide accessibility across the city. Another important aspect is how we protect certain vulnerable populations, especially those that require, certain medical needs and would struggle to evacuate during a flood. Nursing homes that are licensed to house populations that require continual medical care are strained when they either have to shelter in place or evacuate. Therefore, the city is proposing that it's appropriate to limit growth, specifically of nursing homes in high-risk areas. The proposal would prohibit the development of new nursing homes within the 1% floodplain and other kind of particularly vulnerable geographies. Existing nursing homes would still be able to enlarge up to a certain point and do improvements, especially those improvements that would encourage increasing resiliency measures. And finally, Sandy showed us that the lengthy process to update zoning can really slow and hinder disaster relief. So the proposal would make certain recovery provisions available, so they would exist in the text that could be quickly and temporarily enabled following disasters for immediate disaster relief. And some of these provisions are actually specific to address COVID-19 and its associated economic effects. So I'll end on the timeline. This was referred out on October 19th. It's currently out to all 59 community boards, and the ULURP community board clock ends on December 28th, and from there it'll go on to the borough president and then back to the City Planning Commission for a public hearing. And I will end there and happy to take any questions.
I actually have a question about where you ended, because, I mean, we're at December 2nd, and this is a lot of information, and our deadline is, you know, just after Christmas this month. Had we gotten this, at least to review in October, I think we'd be in a better position to do that. But at this juncture, that's kind of tough.
Yeah, we totally understand. You definitely should have received this after the referral in October. So we apologize. There was a lack of material sharing that happened. I think, I don't know if Ryan talked to you directly, you know, the deadline is December 28th. Because this is over the holidays and it's such a dense zoning proposal, the chair, Marisa Lago, has stated that she is going to be accepting community board recommendation letters after the deadline of December 28th. I know some of the other Upper Manhattan community boards are already planning to do so. We're of course encouraging community boards to get in their recommendations as close to the deadline as possible, but we understand with the holidays, it just might not be feasible.
Yeah, well, but it's more than the holidays, and we've actually addressed, we meaning CB12 has addressed this to city planning and other city agencies in the past, where the timing of getting materials does not work with, you know, the schedule of the community board committee meetings. In the past, we received a number of referrals in, you know, late June, knowing that the community board doesn't meet in like July and August, and the deadline is sometime in the summer. You know, in this case, the October 19th referral was clearly after the October land use committee meeting and probably executive committee, but had it been sent, it certainly would have been something we could have touched upon in the November meeting, and I could have asked the committee members to review it in detail and be ready for, you know, more questions for this presentation, you know, in December. And frankly, I was only contacted by Ryan about this meeting, you know, a week ago. It's a very tight time frame, and I think, you know, the referral date, you know, is something that merits some thought, but I think more importantly, there should be simply a general extension of the due date, and not just that we're accepting comments after the due date, but the due date is just, you know, it's too short, all things considered.
Well, Wayne, are you saying that we didn't get anything before our November committee meeting?
I don't even have this presentation. I was contacted, I think last week, or maybe the office was contacted to say that, you know, city planning would like to make this presentation. Can it be added to the agenda? And I said, fine.
But we weren't sent something after October 19th?
Steve, I just said, I do not have this presentation.
Well, I would say that this presentation is not what would have been referred out. This was created by, you know, our internal team. You would have received the zoning text proposal. I was working on this for the past week, but typically you should have received the referral package. And yeah, we apologize for the if that didn't go through, this is kind of an issue where you should have received that from our central office.
Would that have been a package that was sent by mail or sent by email?
I believe everything is digital currently. But
so it probably would have gone to, probably not to me, probably would have gone to the office, the CB12 office.
All right, but you can't hold her responsible if it wasn't forwarded to us.
Well, Steve, at this juncture, I don't know who received what. So we can certainly check. I will touch base with Ebenezer and Al to see if they received anything. But I would think if it were referred out on October 19th, then sometime, before a week or 10 days ago, it would have made sense to contact, the land use chair or the board to say, we'd like to present. That would have been a heads up to do something.
Okay, well, Wayne, let me ask something else. I think what I heard Annie say is that, and I think I remember this, is that there was a previous zoning amendment along these lines back in 2015, maybe? Annie, is that correct?
We had that presentation, we looked at it, and I believe we passed a resolution supporting that initiative. So it's not something that we are opposed to or against. It's just that,
I'm wondering,
a 46-page, presentation, and the actual document is probably denser, and it makes sense for us to understand what we are looking at if we're going to support it, if we're going to comment on it.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just wondering whether our previous resolution in 2015 might have contained some recommendations, and I'd like to know whether or not those recommendations might now be reflected in this new proposal. Well, whether we need to reiterate those recommendations.
I don't think Annie was with city planning. I don't know if she was with city planning at that time, but she was not our rep at the time. We can certainly we can pull up that resolution and see what it said. I think, and at this juncture, if we're at the end of the presentation, we can probably pull it down so I can see the other committee members. I think there are a couple critical things that would be useful. It would be great to have this presentation emailed to us so folks can have it as a reference document. I will have to coordinate with Ebenezer and Al to see what, if anything, we received. I don't know. I don't think it's reasonable for us to try to rush a resolution. Remember, our general meeting this month is 1 week earlier than normal. So that makes it even tighter. So I think the best thing that we can do is to aim for the land use committee to have a resolution to pass at its January meeting, and to have that acted on by the executive committee. So that'll be something, Annie, that would be ready in the middle of January, as opposed to the end of January. But at this juncture, having something by the 28th would mean having something ready for the general meeting this month, and the general meeting this month is like a week before Christmas. It's not a lot of time.
Right. Yeah, and I think your concern about how this material was relayed is very well heard. I think there's a little bit of growing pains with doing these referrals electronically, so I'll follow. I know some other community boards had issues, so I'm going to follow up on that. I think that I do just want to say that if you get us the recommendation in January, that's going to be okay. I think the borough president always wants to see the community boards say, which would be, they might be interested to hear from you before, during their time. But I know there's boards throughout the city that are also looking at a January submission time.
I would like to make two comments. One of them is that based upon this presentation and obviously nothing more, I find what I have seen to be very reasonable and thoughtful. And although I agree that it might be, hasty to act on it tonight, based upon what I see, but again, there may be stuff we haven't contemplated yet. I'm very happy with this. And there's a more general issue, which both Wayne and Steve talked about, this issue of our board and other boards around the city not getting things in a timely manner. And I think they're being very polite in only discussing the fact that this is disrupting the process. As far as I'm concerned, having been a member of this board longer than some people listening have been alive, frankly, I personally find it insulting. If you get late notice for something, that is not a sign of respect. And on the other hand, of course, these are difficult times and it takes longer to do things. But in that case, get it out a month later when it's in proper shape, or when you have your logistics ready to distribute this stuff. Because and again, it's not just you, and I'm sorry that you're getting to hear the lecture first or whatever, because it is true of all the other departments with the other committees on this board. We never get stuff. We used to get stuff in a far more reasonable time frame, like months before, and now it's like a month if we're lucky, and that's basically not acceptable for a lot of reasons. Thank you.
Do we have other questions or comments from committee members? Vivian? You're muted.
Unmuted. I guess I would have wanted more explanation and to understand better where building heights are going to be affected in order to gain height in order to build more resiliently, and how there's any kind of control over that it's not abused.
Sure. So I can give a little bit, spend a little time on this slide. So basically what we would be permitting is a kind of straight uniform height permission across the city, which is within the 1% floodplain. You can measure the height permitted through zoning at 10 feet above grade in that 1% floodplain. And in the 0.2% floodplain, you can start measuring your building height at 5 feet above grade. This is not any more or less than what was previously permitted through the 2013 flood text. It's just more uniform, and it's also extending those, extending that into that 0.2% floodplain as we're trying to be projective and plan for that 2050 flood rise that we saw earlier. So we're also, we actually think that this is going to cut down on a lot of the abuse of this, because there was no requirement to necessarily put your occupiable floor level at that flood elevation. So property owners were kind of automatically given this height variance, but might not necessarily be completely flood proofing their lower level. Well, now that height is definitely tied to where that floor level is existing. So that means, and also these numbers are maximums. So if there's a building that only elevates that first floor level 4 feet, they only get 4 feet of height on top. And then that's maxed out at 10 feet.
I have a quick question. On the previous slide, what does the letter R mean and what does the letter C mean?
Residential and commercial?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I was looking all over the slide, but yes, residential and commercial.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you.
Anything else?
God. Hold on a moment. I lost the connection.
Maybe that's why I can't see, but I can hear you.
Annie? Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Could you show the map again, indicating the, what is it, the orange areas that are affected? Yeah. Could you, it looks as though the neighborhood where Wayne and I live, it might be affected. Is there a way to zero in on the bottom of, at 155th Street?
Down at the very bottom.
Yeah. What is that orange down
That's
there?
the cemetery. That's the cemetery.
Oh, yeah. The cemetery would be in a floodplain? Yeah, sure. No, well, hold it. Well,
So part of the cemetery goes down to the elevation of the river. Because remember,
Yeah,
the viaduct.
yeah, but isn't it blocked? It's blocked by the viaduct, no?
Well, it depends on how waterproof the viaduct is.
All right,
If you
so
look at
so
the blue line, it's not in our district. We don't care about it. But there is
No,
a
that's
horrible orange
Not
zone
really
in
true,
Inwood that
but
we
anyway.
should look at
now,
closely
Wayne and
also.
I and Vivian, I think, are concerned about it. So the cemetery is in a floodplain. Does it have to take any action to protect itself? No, it's not undergoing any renovation. Okay.
Well, let me rephrase that question. And Annie, this is something I was going to ask. The cemetery is not flat. Its elevation at Broadway is significantly higher than the elevation as it slopes down towards the Hudson. So the map is actually incorrect when it shows the entire cemetery from its western edge all the way up to Broadway as being in the flood zone. But the same thing is actually true if you go to my building, which is a couple blocks over, on the building department's website, it shows the building is in a flood zone, but the building is actually several stories above the height of the river. So it's not in a flood zone, but the map, looking at it as flat, it appears that it's only a block away. The topography would show you that it's probably 2 or 3 stories above the height of that. So how do we correct things like that? You know, we're in Washington Heights, south of us is Hamilton Heights, and these maps don't take into account changes in topography.
So yeah, these maps, that's a good question about when you have such a drastic topographic change within a tax lot. These are directly derived from the FEMA maps, but I can ask those that would have these how those delineations are created, and if we know that there's an error, how would we go about addressing that?
Yeah. And we asked the same question years ago when I believe it was Edwin Marshall presented this to us. We had the same question about the FEMA map and some of the areas where, knowing the area, we know it's not flat. And the areas they're showing as being in the flood zone cannot possibly be in a flood zone unless you're saying that you're going to have a flood that is the height of, 3 residential stories.
Yeah. Let me go back to Inwood. Annie, there are 2 large scale projects that are planned for either side of 207th Street at 9th Avenue, and it looks as though they would be in the floodplain. Now, are they going to be subject to this new zoning amendment?
Yes. So the zoning amendment kind of goes across, all districts and ongoing projects that haven't been vested. I think that I believe that when I took a look at this, that they would be partially in the 0.2% flood zone. So they would be required to abide by both the zoning code and the zoning resolution rules in that area. And they also, have special requirements based on the waterfront action plan or access plan, sorry, that was part of the rezoning. So this isn't kind of going against what was put into place through the waterfront access, because those were very much developed in a similar vein. It was going at the same time as these regulations. So there shouldn't be kind of any incongruencies there.
All right, so they're not like grandfathered in so that they don't fall under this umbrella of this new zoning amendment, even though the amendment has not yet been adopted, they would still be subject to it.
Sorry, yeah, of course I'm saying, I'm kind of speaking as if it's already adopted, but of course it's all, proposed at this point. So they would be able to take advantage of some of the permissions, but also have the requirements of the proposed zoning text. Mm-hmm.
So Annie, it would be great if you could email this presentation to me so I can share it, with the committee. I encourage all of my committee members to review it carefully. And I mean, as Jim Berlin and Steve said, we have looked at this in the past. We did pass a resolution supporting the prior iteration. If we had, this information a month ago, we probably could be in a position now to, pass a resolution supporting it with whatever comments, but it would be, terribly rushed to do so at this juncture. But Anne, if you could send this to me, we can make sure that we are in position to act in January. I'm thinking that there's a very, very small chance that maybe we could do something at this month's exec committee. But as I said, that's really pushing it because this is a short month for us. Everything, is happening a little early. I think the general meeting might be in the middle of the month as opposed to the last Tuesday. So it just makes it really tight.
Certainly. And if, we will certainly plan to come back as well in January, perhaps not. You can let us know if you want us to do the full presentation again, or potentially just focus on the areas that there's outstanding questions or concerns about, and happy to take any of those via email.
Right. I would think if you send us the presentation, it could, we may not need to have the presentation again because we have the information and we can review it at our leisure and can then only forward to you any questions or requests for clarification that we may have.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. And as I said, I will certainly check with the office to see if they received digitally any other information, and if so, when that occurred. But typically, when something comes into the office, I get an email asking whether we want to add it to the agenda, and I did get something, but it wasn't pertaining to this. It was pertaining to something I think on 183rd Street that we will discuss in January.
I would also note that I see that there's a. Oh, go ahead. Thank you.
I have some questions in the chat. Can they be asked?
Well, sure.
Okay.
So Maggie, I was just reading through those. I couldn't see the chat when I was sharing my screen. So will these rules change when the flood maps change? Yes. So they are tied to the updated FEMA 1% and 2% floodplain maps. So when those change, the zoning would correlate to those maps. Sorry, feel free to ask them verbally, but I'm also, will these apply to responding with current maps?
Well, maybe I should ask them.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So starting at the beginning, if the damaged by flood and a disaster, as a lot of buildings in Staten Island were, I'm wondering why make it easier to rebuild in the same place? The flooding will only be getting worse.
Very good question. I think there are certain neighborhood specific plans that we're addressing very vulnerable communities. So I kind of glossed over that in the beginning of my presentation, but we actually did 10 separate neighborhood studies that have additional kind of requirements or restrictions for, I think one in Manhattan that I know we did was, the Lower East Side. So there are certain areas where we're looking at restricting growth or density in very vulnerable areas. But I think generally we found that there is, in large part of the cities, including, the areas around CB12, there is a way to build very resiliently to be able to manage storm surge. And that's what we're allowing property owners to rebuild according to those regulations.
So to that point, so is DCP considering the flood levels that are going to be rising all the way out to 2100 and probably beyond? And there are numbers for these by the local, local version of the IPCC, which go out that far. And new buildings are often made to last 100 years, and yet I think your time frame only goes out to 2050. So that's only 30 years from now. Buildings are going to last a lot longer. So shouldn't they be subject to the kind of flooding that's going to happen during their lifetime?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I might have someone in our waterfront division give a more eloquent answer to. But I know that there's kind of certain legal restrictions as to how we designate flood areas. And that's why we're using specifically the FEMA maps of the 1 and 0.2%. What has been explained to me is that the 2000 or the 2100 projections are very, very close to the 2050 projections. So we feel that using that 0.2% that overlines very well with that 2050 projection does give us a much longer span kind of resilient safety. But I can follow up on that a bit more.
Thank you. So regarding the two 30-story buildings that are set to go up in the floodplain at the 207th Street Bridge, I wonder why the planning department would consider it a good idea to place new construction there in the floodplain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is somewhat related to 2 questions ago, is that what we found is that in areas that are in this 0.2% floodplain, we have the building technology and the design technology to build in a very resilient way by ensuring that all dwelling and occupiable floor area is above that flood elevation and engineered with all of the flood and storm surge resiliency that's required via building code. So to balance our need for housing growth, well, with also our need for resiliency, we found that it is it's a good practice to have these restrictions, but still permit density in those areas.
So, and I'm going to, it's 8:31, and I think we have an item of old business, although we did cover a bit of it earlier. So I'm going to thank you for your presentation. I look forward to your sending me the information. I will coordinate with the board office, see what information we previously received, and we will work as expeditiously as we can to get CB12's response to you. Okay?
Okay, Wayne?
Yeah.
Could I just could you just bear with me another moment? Annie, could I get a look one more time at the map?
Well, we're going to get the whole presentation, Steve.
No, I know, but I have a specific question. I think it looks as though it covers the Bakerfield lot with the Allen Hospital. I'm wondering how the hospital might be affected. Yeah, the map on the left, the
map on the right.
I'm sorry, the map on the right. It looks as though just before that loop in Inwood Hill Park, there's a an orange, a large orange trapezoidal area. Looks as though it covers all of Baker Field where the Allen Hospital, among other things, is located. What impact would this have on the hospital?
So, well, I can look a little bit more into, considering this has been an area that has had some flood risk for a very long time. There's certain measures that might have already been taken, but essentially, if they were to do any substantial renovation, they would need to comply with the updated building code, and in addition, would have the opportunity to bring, their building standards into if this proposed text amendment goes through. There might be additional requirements for uses such as hospitals that are such a vulnerable and high intensity use, and that's something I can follow up on.
Well,
Yeah,
you see,
so
the thing they do.
This is another case where we want to check to see if the map is correct vis-a-vis topography.
Yeah, but you see, they do have plans to do substantial renovation inside the hospital and to eliminate some units and create some new ones. And I'm wondering what is the significance of that, and what would that trigger?
So that would trigger, that would certainly trigger them having to come up to the building code. So that would be, either relocating any occupiable floor area above the flood elevation and wet flood proofing, or investing in dry flood proofing the lower level anywhere beyond the flood elevation. But it would also open them to, if they have any building envelope or bulk restrictions, they would be able to take advantage of that minimal additional height, things like that, to ensure that they're able to relocate that floor area.
Isn't the trigger a function of the percentage of the renovated space to the overall size of the building?
Yes, I think it has to do with how renovations are classified. So like Alt 1 versus Alt 2. Yeah.
Right. So I think we're getting too specific into projects for which we don't have information.
Yeah, I can follow up with that.
All right, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. So do we have any old business? I know that Peter and Leslie wanted to talk about 857. Al Taylor, to some extent, preempted that, indicating that, he also agreed with us that the response from Landmarks was, too quick, with not enough attention, and we were talking about how do we approach the mayor's office. He's already done that, so that's great. Anything else on 857 that you'd like to share with us? You have to unmute yourself, Peter.
Well, I just wanted, since this is the public meeting, I just wanted to give a very sort of brief update of where things stand, which is that we did submit a landmarking application to try to commemorate the importance of the house in the history of abolition, the anti-slavery movement, particularly today as America is really trying to confront the history of Black Americans and the wrongs that were committed over 300 years. Unfortunately, Landmarks rather quickly rejected that, and we're going to see if there isn't some way that we can make them think a little more heavily about the importance of overlooked landmarks and overlooked populations, much about what Diego was saying earlier. Secondly, the Department of Buildings issued two determinations, one of which, Annie, if you're still here, this might interest you. They've made some determinations on the zoning map, and this is something I'd love to take up offline with city planning about who exactly controls these maps and ensuring the accuracy of them. But the Department of Buildings apparently a year ago approved both the bulk of this building, claiming that the sliver law doesn't apply, which again isn't very clear, and claiming that there is no park between Upper Riverside Drive and Lower Riverside Drive. Also not entirely legally clear. So these are things that we're going to keep looking at. And, you know, we're really disappointed because this is a neighborhood that has evolved massively since the zoning plan was written adopted, and zoning resolution was adopted in 1961. And the whole idea of, you know, Miami-style towers along the river is no longer appropriate. And this is particularly true when we realize that Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, and Inglewood have some of the highest rates of COVID now because of the massive density of our neighborhoods. And the idea of opening the door with a building like this to creating further density in an area that is already unhealthily dense. I mean, literally people are dying because it's dense. This is the wrong way to go. What we need in this neighborhood is not only a respect for our history, but we need a zoning for this area and the cooperation of zoning department, buildings department, various other people to say, we need more affordable housing here for the kind of people who have made this place their home for generations. And that's part and parcel of what we're trying to do. And I just want to really appreciate Al Taylor's support. I appreciate the attention that Annie and Ryan have given to this so far. And I really appreciate the whole community's support. And I think that together we can still make a difference here. And let's see how we can work together. That's my long-winded statement, but thanks.
Yeah. So Annie, to clarify a bit more what Peter said, and Tim Anderson was on the prior call, there seems to be a question as to why the building department issued one of the approvals, because the question isn't whether, basically the question is what is the width of the street? And the zoning, the ZOLA map have the dimensions of the street. It's not quite clear why DOB is opining otherwise. And I know that when we initially approached city planning with this question, you pointed out that the building department's responsibility was to do the zoning review and see what was applicable. And one of the documents that apparently they worked on a year ago, but only posted now, does that. But the other one is the one where they are claiming the land between the two sections of Riverside Drive is not parkland, which apparently was news to Steve Simons in the last 20 years. But they also seem to be stepping into city planning's role, talking about the width of the street, and the zoning maps apparently already established what the width of the street is. So we really need city planning to take a look at that to see whether or not what the building department has written is at all accurate and is even in their jurisdiction on which to apply.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I haven't
more a clearer description of that.
Yeah, and I haven't seen from the last time I checked in on this, I haven't seen the actual approval that's being referenced from a year ago to see what their determination was. I know that it was a question of how they were interpreting the wide versus narrow street of the two Riverside Drive, but I'm happy to follow up and take a look.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can forward it to you. I received it. Peter can forward it to you. But I think in the last meeting, someone made it clear that it's like the building department is answering the wrong question. The question is, it's a matter of fact and measurement. What is the width of the street? And that apparently is already established in the ZOLA map. So, and why they are trying to come up with a different way to establish the width of the street is questionable. But I will send you the document, and as I said, I wasn't on the discussion for the entire length. I think Tim was, and probably, but in any case, could probably give you a much clearer sense of what the specific question is that we need city planning to take a look at vis-a-vis whether the building department Department should be discussing it at all. Is there anything else for old business? Any new business? Hearing none, I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving, a socially distanced Thanksgiving with not lots of leftovers. Looking forward to the upcoming holidays, also wonderful, safe holidays. Is there a motion to adjourn?
No, before you adjourn, Wayne, you may recall.
Old business or new business, Steve?
What is that?
Was it old business or new business, Steve?
The new business.
But then I asked for new business and there was nothing.
No, I was muting. You may recall I sent you an email a few weeks back about there's a new building going up on Broadway just south of the library in Inwood. It looks like it's an office building, and I thought it might be useful for us to invite that developer and get a better sense of what he plans to do with that building.
I attended the Business Development Committee last night. They also raised this, and I think Domingo is intent on inviting them to get some clarity on the project, particularly from the perspective of, are there opportunities to ensure that there's affordable space, for folks who need it. So maybe we could coordinate with business development and see what their plans are.
Okay. All right, because I think what I read on Facebook is that maybe it's supposed to be an office building, which seemed a little strange.
Exactly. That's why business development wanted to get more information on it.
Okay, very good.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to get some clarity. That is the building that's located on the lot next to the Inwood Library?
Exactly.
Yes. Do you know anything about it?
I think Natalie may have some information on it. I'm going to double check with her tomorrow.
So if you have any information on it, Tim, both land use and business development, we would love to obtain it.
Absolutely.
Any other new business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Motion to adjourn.
I second. I said that I would second.
Okay, yeah. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all.